5:30, I'd like to call to order our regular meeting for the Fargo Board of Education. Please, if you are able, stand and join us in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, next I would look for a motion to approve our agenda. All right, Robin.
I move approval of the agenda with a human capital addendum.
Second.
Thank you. Moved by Robin and seconded by Niamal. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say yes.
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 Any opposed?
Yes.
Thank you. Any opposed, same sign? All right, motion carries. Next, we will move on to our recognition of the audience. At this time, the board will hear comments from the public. We ask that each speaker who has signed up to address the board state their name and home school district for the record. Speakers must refrain from using this forum to criticize or complain about a specific employee or student by name. Vulgar or profane language will not be tolerated. The board is interested in your comments and will listen carefully, but is not obligated to respond to or debate issues in this forum. This evening, 2 speakers have signed up to address the board. Each speaker will be allotted a maximum of 3 minutes. Upon conclusion of the allotted time, a chime will sound and the speaker is asked to conclude. If necessary, a final chime will sound 15 seconds later, signifying the end of the speaker's time at the podium. I will now call our first speaker to the podium, who is Devin Suchinski.
Devin Stuchinski, HMR. Well, I see the usual crowd is here. Noting that my call last week to other candidates wasn't heard. But I'm not here to talk about that today. I'm here to talk about something that's been brought to my attention repeatedly by staff. And it has a lot to do with culture. The culture of this district, a culture of the administration, and a culture of the board. Now, I'm sure a good number of you every once in a while will hear something from a concerned teacher. I hear stuff quite often. And I always ask them why they don't raise it through their chain of command or come express their concerns to the board. And what I get told is the board will do nothing or just side with administration. You know, general indifference is the sentiment. And then when I ask why they don't raise it up through administration and regular channels for just basic disagreement or concern with something that is going on, I get told because they fear the administration. They absolutely fear reprisal for speaking out in any way, shape, or form. Now, I'm not exactly sure where the pressure comes from for this fear, but every teacher who talks to me says, please do not ever say my name, because I fear I'm going to either get fired or railroaded in some capacity. And that is an outright toxic environment. And it's no wonder that you guys struggle to keep teachers here. Teachers are outright terrified. If they have a concern, they will either not be heard by the board or they'll be outright pressured to keep their mouth shut. So just some food for thought as we go into this election and as this board moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Paul Moore.
Whoops. Paul Moore, Fargo. So a little bit about just in general first. So the agenda for this meeting comes out on the Friday before. The people have a lot of time scheduled with their families on the weekends, and so they don't want to prioritize looking at this agenda and the items when they're spending time with their families. So then that leaves like Monday and Tuesday to really look at the agenda. But some of us, and I assume most of the parents, are concerned, but they have jobs. So that kind of cuts everything back to Monday night. Some of these items are very complicated. Some of them tonight are very complicated. And understanding, it's hard, and it's hard to get the questions that you want to ask. But that's only because, and that's okay, because you only got 3 minutes to say what you want to say anyway. And then along that same lines as the teachers, the parents are probably going, well, nobody listens to me anyway, so why bother to show up? Some general thoughts on the memos that I had. So memo 102, $3,000 more per student than the next school. And so what are we getting? We need to look at something other than the money. What is being done to listen to what the teaching staff is saying? What do they think the problems are? Because not all the problems are with money. Paraprofessionals, it says a hard time getting paraprofessionals hired. It's kind of the same thing. What are the issues that they have besides the money that they're not getting handled? I love the part about the average base salary of administration being $135,000 and the average teacher salary being $72,000, which, kind of a rough math thing is half. A question about the blue stem portion. If you're subletting everything now, you are in control. You manage the facility since 2012. That's on page 24. And if everybody is now subletting from Fargo Public Schools, isn't the events there that serve alcohol then violating school policy? On memo 103, GP 6, 2 people marked it inadequate. That's the first time I can remember where it wasn't a firewall everybody approved. But in the end, it doesn't really say why. So the question that I have is, how do you solve a problem that you don't define? Okay, so I think that, the next step would be great. If somebody disagrees, that's awesome. I mean, having the diversity of everybody's thoughts is a good thing. If everybody's all together all the time, you're not learning anything. So, but you've got to go into the next step and figure out what's going on. All right, I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. We will move on to our report section this evening. I've heard that the FEA will not be presenting a report, so we will skip right to the administration report.
Thank you. I will just give it a minute for IT to get the screens up because I will be presenting today for the administrative report. Thank you, board members. First, as attached with your board packet, we have memo 102. This is the annual standard of effort report that we provide to the board members. I know this report historically in the past has been used for a variety of purposes, whether it's to look at some district decisions that we make, whether it is to help with some of our conversations legislatively, but it is quite a comprehensive data set that shows our standard of effort as a district across a variety of different district elements in comparison to the districts within our region that we normally use as comparison districts. So first and foremost, just wanted to say thank you to Jackie Gap and her business services team for putting that together. it is a lot of information and takes a lot of time to be able to do that. So just want to acknowledge their works and efforts in doing that. Secondly, I also just wanted to share that we share this at planning as well. As we look at the standard of effort report and how it's utilized, the board, with the approval of the Unified Strategic and Operational Plan at the last meeting, has given us a set of concrete measures or data points that we want to continuously use for our own growth and development in our district. And most importantly, for determining progress and success for what we are trying to do. So as we move forward, one of the suggestions that I talked to planning about is looking at some changes to the standard of effort report in future years. I think that instead of just looking at comparisons across various elements within the district, in our standard of effort should essentially serve as an impact report that really also looks at some of those measures that we are using to track our own progress and whether our strategies or our investment are actually obtaining progress towards those areas or not, because that gives us some of the meaningful data points. So I know that some members of planning or other board members may have different suggestions for different data points that you want to look through. Just having this conversation at planning kind of opened up some conversation for all of us where we just learned that, this is an in-house report that we do. So we want to make this report as meaningful for your work, for our work as well. So I would just say that work with your colleagues on planning as well if there's different data points or different things that you think would be helpful with board work as we move forward. And then just stand for any questions that you may have regarding the standard of effort report provided to you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from board members?
All right.
Oh, I think Greg does.
I was gonna let other people start before I. All right, so, it's on page 7, of the reports, though it might be a different page as far, it's labeled page 7 on the bottom. I don't, with the memo and stuff, it might not be exactly page 7, but on the bottom of the report, it says page 7. The pages starts with expenditures broken out by teaching staff. And I was wondering, that, so, I can understand and get behind defining teacher and administrator through the way it's defined in Century Code. That's great. But there's a third column that doesn't have a clear explanation given, and that's other licensed personnel. I was wondering if we could get maybe some explanation as to what that category entails and what maybe some examples.
Yeah, and I will ask if there's any other cabinet member that wants to chime in here as well. So you see that in that table, we use the Century Code definition of teacher and administrator. Oftentimes an administrator, for example, the Century Code definition might be a school administrator or another administrator that's licensed, whereas we might also have someone that serves in an administrative function in our school district that may not be considered an administrator somewhere else. So I don't know if, I'll give an example, any other department outside of teaching and learning, I could essentially say a director of facilities, a director, I believe the director of standards-based instruction. I'm not sure if that's actually considered an administrator in Century Code. That person might be because they have a teaching license, but the director of facility is not. So I think that that's going to be your catch-all category for like admin that we use in the district, but are not considered admin that are in Century Code. And I think we have quite a bit of positions in our district that we might consider. We use 4 employee groups, classified, certified, professional support staff, and administrators. An administrator in Fargo Public Schools may not be an administrator by definition in North Dakota Century Code as we report out to them. So I think that is what other licensed professionals would be.
So, I mean, we're not unique in having more people fall into other licensed personnel than administrators. But based on, I guess, your description, it sounds like other licensed personnel is kind of a catch-all for administrators that aren't clearly defined as an administrator by Century Code?
Yeah, so for example, actually, you saying that just made me think of the best example I can give that I think we've used in previous years too. Deans. Uh, Deans, by definition, in this report, so our neighboring district, West Fargo, staffs an elementary principal and an elementary dean. We staff an elementary principal and an assistant principal. One of those is considered an administrator by the definition provided by North Dakota Century Code, and another one isn't. So that would be one of those prime examples. And yeah, essentially, I do think it's a catch-all. I would have to get with Jackie to see what are all the positions and if there's more than what I'm just sharing here too. But that's how I'm viewing it. But I think that's a really important question, and we've had this in previous standard of effort reports too, to be able to get to that level of granularity to compare apples to apples. So I think this is one of those things that I would probably look to change down the road, because I want to know who are the staff that we have towards the outcomes that we want to achieve, or even if this report changes by just saying, let's consider who the organization considers administrators, because I view the second layer of leadership at an elementary school across both school districts, the very essentially for functioning the same. There might be some differences between a dean and an AP, but it could also be variance based on how West Fargo uses it versus we do.
Yeah, and just a kind of follow-up slash comment, I think how you're collecting the information is also going to be important in how that's being captured. And I think it is, if our neighbor is not using titles the same way, I think that's going to impact the data in a way that can be misleading. So thank you for explaining that.
Agreed. And then you also may have grant positions too. Like someone, West Fargo received a huge mental health grant, and they have several positions of leadership that are looking at that grant. That might be an administrator in their district. That would count if we were only looking at their admin position. And we may not have that position, but that position might be grant funded too. So like I think sometimes this effort is good to look at a very high level, but these would be some of those reasons that I think that there's probably more changes that we can make to this report to use it what's most meaningful for us.
Great, thank you. Yep, Robin?
How I'm interpreting this is somebody who works with different levels of really accounting classifications, and in which classification they are identified. And that can vary by different organizations and within my own. And those continue to flux as well due to job duties. So I really appreciate that you're looking to drill down on this in the future.
I would also say this is the type of feedback that we would want as we develop it moving forward. So thank you for that question, because I agree.
Thank you. Anything else?
Yeah. I'm sifting through because I know like we're wanting to do this kind of changes and whatnot. So I've been working through notes that I have and trying to make sure I'm only asking questions that I think are maybe more pertinent now versus like trying to improve upon different future iterations. I think my next one is on the page labeled page 9. And I think this should be a quick clarifying question, but in the third table, it expresses like stuff about salary. And the last column says average compensation, and that's obviously the highest number on that table. Is that like including like TFFR calculations and maybe like paid time off, like personal days and sick days? I guess I'm just wondering how that average compensation might be calculated.
I believe that is solely the average of the base pay from the matrix. So I don't think that's inclusive of benefits. I think it's just looking at the salary. I would have to verify with Jackie, but just the way I interpret that and how I've interpreted that in the past, I'm not sure. if anyone else.
Melissa,
Yes, Jim?
this is Jim. This is Jim. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. I can give a little color to this information on page 9. It actually does include the average cost of benefits. Sick leave, PTO, that isn't going to be calculated in here because that's part of their salary to begin with. But if you look at the fourth column, or excuse me, the fifth column, you'll see the average salary for a teacher was 72,000 in Fargo. When we add in the average benefit cost, it goes up to $95,004. If we look at West Fargo, who we're always compared to, their average salary is 56,102, much less than us. That's part because of the experience level of their teachers. But you'll notice they get quite a bit closer on the average comp, and that's because they pay both sides of TFFR, but they're still about $9,000 less than us. And if you would bear with me for a moment, I would like to address some of the questions I guess we've gotten from the podium, both from Paul in the past, Devin in the past, a local radio guy in the past, who keeps wondering why we're spending more money than West Fargo. When we look at teacher compensation in total, number of FTEs times that average compensation number, it's 88,828,000. If I do the same math for West Fargo, it's $81,451 and 470. So we got about a $8,000 differential, $7,500 or $7,500,000 differential between what we spend on teacher compensation. And if you jump to page 3, it even puts it more in perspective because a mill that we would levy in Fargo produces about $544,000 of revenue for us to educate our students on a local basis. The assessed value per student in West Fargo is $571,000. This is a flip from when I got on the board, by the way, because of the development that's happened in the commercial area up by West Acres and south, out by all of the growth out by the south side of Fargo. So we have a lower taxable valuation per mill. So to raise the same money, we have to have a higher mill levy. And we're actually investing much more in our teachers currently than West Fargo. Now, that's not because West Fargo is poorly paying their teachers. It's that the years of experience of our staff are most likely significantly greater than the years of experience of West Fargo. So I don't know if that clarifies a little bit of that average compensation number, but I think this is what people need to drive into when they keep trying to compare our district to others. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. I think I saw Dr. Gandhi first.
So Jim, just thank you for that. So my understanding for that average compensation, it is including salary plus TFFR, but not including any other benefits like leave costs or, like you said, sick leave or any other benefits that we may have. Is that correct? Or from your understanding?
Absolutely. And I'd actually say if we added health insurance in, we'd even look like we're compensating greater. But I don't know that for fact. But this includes the TFFR calculation, and that's where it changes from average salary to average comp.
Robin?
May I ask Jim, as the chair of the planning committee, one more question?
Yes, please.
Jim, so when we compare, as you said, we're often compared to West Fargo. Can you explain the difference between how compressed our salary schedule is and why that drives up the average, because our teachers make more sooner within that compressed salary schedule and therefore more over the duration of their contract?
Sure, I can try to address it. Obviously, we each have a starting base salary, and they're fairly comparable. But then it's the number of years you have to go in service to hit the maximum pay on the schedule. And we're probably about, I haven't looked at West Fargo's current contract, so give me a little grace here. you get to the top of the Fargo public school schedule about 10 years earlier as a teacher. So if you got out of college at age 22, started teaching in Fargo Public Schools or West Fargo, it's going to take 10 more years of service in West Fargo to get the top of their matrix. And obviously, along the way, there are differences from one year to the next between the two matrices. But that is another factor that certainly is driving things. Um, but again, we probably have one of the most accelerated schedules in the state. Now, I think there are some districts out west that actually compress even faster than we do in Fargo. But it's about trying to get our quality teachers paid as much as we can, and actually our beginning teachers paid as much as we can. And I think everybody on this board, including me, would like to pay them more if we only had more money to spend.
Thank you, Jim. Yep.
I
Seth?
just want to point out to Jim, though, and for anybody else that's watching this, this is actually on the what we've been talking about is on page 7 too. The average teaching years of experience is 9, West Fargo 13 here, and then there's 25 steps in the West Fargo schedule. So if anybody's looking, that's where that information's at.
Thank you, Seth. All right. Greg, more questions?
I appreciate others jumping in. I think my next one would be on. Well, okay, this one takes 2 pages. 13 and lost my place. Give me a second. 18 and 19. That's the PDF pages. The labeled pages are 14 and 15. My apologies. I think one thing that's easy to point out in the top of page 14 is Fargo's leading the pack as far as the total count of admin full-time equivalents. And I think I pointed that out last year. This year, I realized there is some nuance that kind of escaped me last year that I think is worth pointing out, and why I mentioned this also includes data from page 15 is looking at admin as a function of the number of school buildings that we have. I think last year it had escaped me, and I think it's an easy mistake that others may well make to note that Fargo has more admin, but we also have more school buildings than most of our peers. And while I haven't done the full calculations, I do think Fargo has more admin per school still compared to our peers. That ratio closes the gap quite a bit there. So that was not a question. That was more of a, hey guys, I learned something from last year.
Great, thank you.
All right, next question is from, it's labeled page 17 regarding student transportation expenditures. We have, a pretty small walkout radius, especially compared to our neighbors in West Fargo. And I think that, certainly explains a decent chunk of why our per pupil transportation cost is higher. And maybe this is a question for people in Bismarck, but like they have a shorter walkout radius than us or similar. the same for elementary, shorter for secondary, and yet their per pupil transportation cost is, almost $200 per student less. And I'm wondering if maybe they can share some secrets with us, because, yeah, I mean, like, their walkout radius is smaller and they still have less costs. So kind of wondering, if admin has any sort of guess as to why that is, or ideas.
Melissa, this is Jim.
Yes,
I
Jim.
might have one. I'm not 100% sure, Greg, but I'm probably 95% sure that this also includes special ed transportation, which we have a much higher cost for special ed transportation than Bismarck does, because we have many more students that are qualified for that transportation. I believe that's in these numbers. I don't think this is just our normal routes. I think this is the total cost, which would include special ed, regular routes, probably even field trips, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it does. And I also had that notion, but the comparison between inter district comparisons did not get to that level of granularity, so I wasn't sure, but you're probably right.
Yes, Dr. Gandhi?
So if we were playing Family Feud, I think Jim's response would be like what I would think is the number one answer on that special ed transportation. But I think number 2, 3, and 4, I also think that there's a consideration that we would have to take a look at with our buildings too. Again, even with Bismarck, like how many kids do we have per building? If we have more buildings, then you're gonna need more bus routes. Also, we provide, so for like CTE purposes, we provide secondary transportation. Like we run a couple of routes for our high school students and then even shuttles between different programs to be able to connect. Whereas Bismarck has a career academy that's centralized in one location. So there's a lot of nuances that we can probably get to. Those are my speculations, and I too, like Jim, don't want to say those are the sole reasons, but those are just some qualitative pieces that I know that could impact this data as well.
Yeah, thank you.
The page is labeled page 24 regarding Blue STEM. Usually, I've found outliers tend to have easier explanations. So hopefully, someone knows off the top of their head why facility expenditures were more than double for 23 versus 22, or basically double every year going back to 2019.
I will have to go back and let you know. I do know that so if it's technical equipment, stage, some of the major things, Blue STEM are extremely expensive. So when they happen, they're a big ticket item. Where we are today in April, and then this being monitored from the previous year, I just can't remember if some of the major projects I know have happened at Blue STEM were captured in this report or not. So I'd have to go back and check.
All right. I think probably the last one. The data from, it's labeled page 27 and 28. It's the SPED expenditures. I guess first, I have 2 questions. So first, I'm maybe a little lost at how the data is being that first chart is being calculated. Well, I guess it'd be maybe the first 2. So West Fargo's cost to educate students with disabilities is the highest per pupil. And the table at the bottom of that page shows they have less total expenditures than Fargo and Bismarck. But West Fargo has more students. So I'm wondering, is it like a per sped student, or is it just per pupil in general?
I don't know the answer. Oh, Bill
Bill's
does.
waving his hand.
That one
yeah.
is per sped student.
Okay, awesome. All right. Then the last question. The bottom of page 27 is expenditures by category. And then top of page 28 is expenditures by service area. I assume that's just two different ways of kind of breaking down the same sped data. But the totals for each district don't match.
Are you saying the table, the data for the table in 28 doesn't match the
Yeah,
chart on
so like at
27?
the bottom of 27, it says Fargo's total expenditures by category was 35.6 million. And then on page 28, it says Fargo's total expenditures was 35.8 million.
So, again, speculation here, but just the caveat on the paragraph above on 27 says it does not include tuition paid to other districts or other providers for special education services. And I'm not sure if the one on 28 is just what we're providing, because that could be big. And I think like even on the top chart on page 27, I think that's a big consideration, because when it comes to special education, there a significant cost, or there is a cost, whether we're getting special education services from another district or another provider as well. So even for West Fargo, like where the bottom chart on 27 says this does not include tuition paid to other districts to educate students with disabilities. If West Fargo has sent students to us at the Explore Academy, that would not be included here, but that would be a cost that they are paying and attributed to. So speculating here based on just that information, but that could be the difference in those numbers.
Well, so the chart on 28 does have transportation and tuition, but that makes the numbers even more not aligned with the totals. Because first the difference is like 200,000, but then yeah, if it's tuition and transportation, that's 4.2 million. I guess I'm not. I'm just really kind of at a loss for
Yeah,
if we're breaking it out in two different ways.
I just don't know. I'll have to get back to you.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you so much. Or yes, you did. Okay.
That is just 1/3 of my admin update today, so brace
Gosh,
yourselves.
okay. My apologies. Okay.
So sorry, that is solely the standard of effort report. I do have quite a bit on the admin update today, so I apologize. Update number 2, just an FYI, at your next board meeting, administration is requesting and going to pull one of the items that you would traditionally have on consent and into business. That is the RFP for mental and behavioral health services, because that is aligned to the mental health treatment program that we are starting at the Explore Academy, which we talked about when we talked about this is a program that would have to essentially operate under the framework of a non-traditional school. We thought that when we present the RFP for approval to the service provider that has been selected, it would be important for the board to also just receive a presentation of what that model is going to look like based off some of those questions. And if you have any questions for that service provider, because it's not just a direct piece of service, like they have to establish a non-public school. So if it's okay with you guys, then we are going to pull that item from consent, put it on business, and then add a presentation on the front end to allow board members to ask questions about that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea and appreciate the time and effort that's going to take. So thank you.
Thank you. So, like I said, I do have a presentation today, and now I want to talk about Unified Strategic and Operational Plan. And I know that this has been the conversation at your last 3 board meetings, and I appreciate you entertaining another conversation about this. But the reality is that if we're doing this work right as we move forward, the Unified Strategic and Operational Plan, and the amount of times I mentioned that and talk about that at board meetings should be as obnoxious as the font on the screen, because that really is something that we are trying to use to drive a lot of our conversations today. So I wanted to touch base just a little bit about the significance of what your approval meant, but then also respond to some of the data from the staff culture survey, and then just also how we want to use that to make decision-making in our district moving forward. So after last week's approval from the board, I did write a cabinet column to our school talk and journey newsletters for staff and community members. But the reality is, like, even myself, as a parent in the school district, a cabinet column about the strategic plan might not get as many reads or be as enticing as it is for me. But so I wanted to talk through a little bit of just kind of what that plan is established. And I think you all know from your approval last month that, you know, the plan focuses on educational justice standard-based instruction, really focusing on strategic alignment, result monitoring, and budget alignment. But most importantly, what that plan has done, and in the course of this presentation today, you're going to see a lot more words on the screen, and that is so you, or if anyone else has questions afterwards, you can go back to it. I'm not expecting you to read all those words. I normally wouldn't put that many words on a presentation, but that's just more for context. But as I've shared before, this plan is really going to be the metrics that we use to define success in Fargo Public Schools. And I think that's really important because that is going to be how we want our staff and our community to operate, and then also hold us accountable for whether we're making reasonable progress or not for our students. And I think it's really important to understand, like, some of the changes that we've made. So traditionally, we have looked at performance through standardized test scores, and for a variety of reasons, we're able to contextualize data when it comes to proficiency rates or some other pieces that you'll hear as public education continues to come under fire, or people can pull one data point from one assessment in a state of time. We're going to measure academic performance through proficiency of specific essential learning outcomes, the responsibility that we have to teach our students and whether they are proficient in mastering those standards. That is very different than your overall proficiency on one test at one point in time. That doesn't mean that we don't value the other pieces of data that we use, but those are the work, that progress towards ELO proficiency is how we will measure our progress in our district, knowing that if we do that work right, there will be an alignment and a correlation with test scores. But we are going to have our self-directed academy next year that is 100% based on allowing students to master content at their own pace, as long as they still get it done in the time that's allocated to them. At this point in time, no matter what we're having great collaborative conversations with the Department of Public Instruction, but there's a wide variety of state and federal bureaucratic reasons why we are not able to or been approved to do through-year assessments. Through-year assessments allow us to assess students on what are traditional standardized assessments when they have mastered that content, or only allow them to be assessed on the objectives that have been taught to them. So next year, for example, we have a big disconnect where our self-directed academy may have students that came in late or only mastered a set of objectives, but the timing of the standardized test that they won't allow us to modify will assess those students on things that they haven't even covered yet. And that would be a false representation of the quality of work that's happening at that school. So that is why these local pieces of data are so important for us as well. The other thing that two other areas that I really want to highlight is our transition as a school district to not only emphasize out-of-school suspension and expulsion, because I think a lot of our admin, as we start to look at exclusionary practices and the negative and harmful impact they have, sometimes the more professional development we provide in that area it creates an admin mindset of like, I want to avoid those exclusionary practices. So I want to avoid suspension and expulsion. But the reality is that's not the outcome that we want for our students. And we don't want an admin to make a decision from that framework because you've recently gone through professional development or RUPOC said, hey, we need to get suspension and expulsions under check, right? Like that's the end goal is for us to teach our students in a way where they feel safe to be in our schools and understand that if you mess up or have an infraction, you have created harm. How are we going to work to create that harm and not repeat that behavior again? So extremely proud of our Ed Justice team, our associate superintendents and several others that are working to build a data infrastructure where we are going to be tracking recidivism as one of our primary tools. And I think the community shift on that is going to be huge in our school districts because we as school district administrators, for as long as I've been in education, have always heard some of these phrases of a little bit of a change or difference in philosophies between school teachers and maybe some people in the community that says if this student behaved this way out in the community, that wouldn't be tolerated or wouldn't be allowed. But the reality is school's a place to learn. So if we can't teach our students to be able to learn in our school and then be able to track that, then what does that mean for our purpose? And there would always be some of those conflicts. So I think being able to openly say like, we make our decisions trying to teach students that it's okay to mess up, but if you mess up, what are we going to do not to have that do that again? It just changes the mindset of an administrator when they are working with the student if that's the end goal versus just saying I want to keep our suspension numbers down or expulsion numbers down. So that's also what's led us to in the future look at some different programs that we can provide for students in lieu of extended suspensions or expulsions as well. And really excited about some of that work. And then the second thing is just access to mental health. One of the measures that we're going to be tracking is if at least 2% of our students across all levels in the school district are accessing mental health supports as well. Because if not, then it will give us a key understanding of where some of those gaps are. And then we are able to then compare that data to what the average percent of adolescent youth might be that need access to mental health. And if there's a gap between our 2% and 6% in the community or other data if that's available, then we can work strategically to be able to fill those gaps. But I think sometimes we just kind of spin in circles when we use mental and behavioral health as a broad spectrum. And then we say, do our students have access or do they not have access? So kind of excited about some of the specific measures, but really going to be leaning on that as we use our strategic and operational plan moving forward. So just wanted to highlight some of those pieces. I also think that our strategic and operational plan, as we move forward, there are some commitments here, right? If we are using this document to be our big guide in how we make decisions in our district and what we are trying to achieve, then I think it's important for our parents to know that none of our measures are based on a zero-sum mentality. That means that achieving one good for a student comes at the cost of another student. And over the last couple of years, as we look at this constant narrative in public education around maybe our educational justice work or our DEI work, I think it's often assumed that doing that work for one group of students is pulling away from another student. And if you truly take a look at how we are doing our work in Fargo Public Schools and this very specific measures that we're going to strive to evaluate our own success and as an organization, we are not doing that. We are actually wanting every student to be proficient in their ELOs, and that doesn't come at a cost of another student. So hopefully, we are not trying as a school district to get part of the political fray that education is getting pulled into. But we do need to recognize that we have a responsibility to educate all children, regardless of what their parents' political beliefs are or lack thereof. And our measures give us that clear definition of success so it is a commitment to our parents and our students that we don't view things in a zero-sum game. But I think to our staff also, we now have a universal set of goals that we can commit to. And I think that's really important because that's going to drive and evaluate a lot of the work that we do and the decisions that we make as a district. But I also hope that what this strategic plan, unified strategic and operational plan does is for our board and for our FEA when we go to negotiations, which are emotional, which are tough moving forward, that it gives us a premise or something to be able to evaluate the efficacy of what we're talking about. So when a concept, a proposal, a thought is proposed, which measure is it tied to and how effective is that strategy to hit our goals? If we are aligned in what those goals are, then that makes that conversation a lot easier. And I'm going to demonstrate that a little bit further throughout this presentation, but hopefully that can be something that we use as a document, because at the end of the day, if the negotiations of the teacher contract, whether it's from the board's perspective or the FEA's perspective, comes in with a different set of outcomes that they're measuring or how they're using to evaluate success, it's going to hinder our staff, because our staff are going to be in this framework that the board has adopted, that administration and every other person in the organization is using to measure their success. And they might be put in a position where they're advocating for an employee right or an employee, whatever that proposal is, that actually measures success in a different way, right? So that is why I hope that as we move forward, we're able to utilize that strategic and operational plan. So why am I having this conversation with you today and presenting this at today's board meeting? Is because I think we owe it to our staff to be able to respond to the recent staff survey we gave. And the recent staff survey we gave had some key strengths to celebrate in our organization, right? 65% report that FPS is a positive place to work. It's really important to me that the second bullet shows that the majority of our staff report positive indications of connection to their job. I'm sorry, the third one, where overwhelmingly our staff report safe at work. Because when I started here in 2017, 2018, safety was a large term that was used, and we have made some significant shifts as an organization, so I'm really proud of those data points. But data is reality, and at the end of the day, there is also some huge growth opportunities in our district, and the biggest one is that there's a consistent gap between feeling seen and heard by school level leaders versus district level leaders. Our staff feel tremendously supported, seen, and heard by their school leaders. They do not, based on some of the primary theme from the staff survey. That is no one's own but myself. When it comes to district leadership, that is me. As much as someone can say, well, if it's primarily professional development, is that just teaching and learning or something? It's not, because the reality is our structure of our organization is that I have the authority to make decisions, but I'm furthest removed from any staff in their direct position. And I think we have to recognize that to say, what can we do better? So I think we owe it to our staff to also say, what are we gonna do about this gap between being both heard and supported by district level leaders, and then also have influence on district decision-making? So when I analyze, and a common strategy for us is when there's a problem that we need to solve, we go through a 5 why analysis, meaning to get to the root cause of a problem, you start with what the problem is, and then you keep asking probing questions 5 different times of why that happens to be able to get to a piece. So when I do a 5 why analysis on why is there a gap, there's an information gap, right, between what the district is and what some of our staff are hearing. It's because communication's hindered by organizational hierarchy, keep going down. So why is that? Well, there's too many layers that information has to pass through, which leads to delays and distortions. Well, why is that? Because each level of the hierarchy may not prioritize or understand the importance of the information the same way. And it is true. Like, in my position as a superintendent, I am not in a classroom every single day, and I wish I could be. But at the same point, I also have access to a lot more information than someone in a different position may not. And if there isn't unison across every layer that normally would filter that information, someone would think that there's a disconnect between my school level leader and the district leader. So when you don't have that, you ask the question, why? Why is there a variance in who prioritizes what in their understanding? Is because we have lacked a clear guidance on communication flow and how we prioritize and what we prioritize in our district. So why do we do that? Because there hasn't been clear guidelines. This organization, until now, we haven't had an established universal standard for communicating and decision-making process. So that's something that we want to change as we move forward. So the 5 why analysis is great. That's Rupak's analysis. But what does research say? And you don't need to read all of this, but what this research essentially will show you is that when it comes to organizational culture and organizational leadership, you can just read the bolded pieces of a variety of different research sources, but indicating that a lack of shared goals or direction can significantly impact employee well-being and organizational cohesion. Another one, research will show you that there's approach emphasizes that there's an importance for creating an as-one environment where individuals collectively pursue organizational goals, underscoring the significance of collective buy-in and shared direction for organizational success. And then two other sources that would essentially say the same thing, supporting why this unified strategic and operational plan and using that as their guiding document for our district and decision-making is important. I'm going to talk a little bit about contempt and resentment versus dignity, and that is not about people. That is about sometimes the way we communicate. And whether it's been through legislation, whether it's been through negotiations, whether it's just been through other disagreements, oftentimes, sometimes the way we communicate with one another is harsher than it needs to be because there's a level of contempt or resentment going into that, right? And why? So I've been thinking a lot about why is that? Because when staff say they don't feel heard, that's not to me a communication problem that says we need to do better on school newsletters or increase access to information. That to me shows that some of our staff don't understand why we make the decision that we do, and they don't understand that. So when we break that down, and that creates some of the tension that we've felt in the past, why is that? And I think a big reason for that is we are framing issues when there is a level of disagreement in our organization that we're not working towards the same piece. And someone might be looking at the preservation of practice versus achieving an outcome. They might be looking at the preservation of an experience versus achieving an outcome, or the preservation of principles versus achieving an outcome. And I'll talk a little bit deeper about those, but if I'm having a conversation with someone and I'm trying to preserve a practice that I think is fundamentally important, like something that I've been doing for my entire career, and you're telling me to change it, I don't understand if your goal is to achieve an outcome, but my goal is to preserve my practice, and we don't have a unison outcome to work in. My goal becomes preserving the practice. And that just becomes a constant state of disagreement because I am going to think that you are trying to change my traditional practice, and that is going to make me question your intent. That is going to make me feel unvalued. It's going to also make me feel unheard because I'm not bought into the same goal that you're working towards. And I think that your goal, I may in that situation think that your goal of the outcome that you're trying to achieve is not as significant as the practice I'm trying to achieve because I haven't put value towards that goal either. So I think this is one of those areas where, as we talk through this, it'll make a little bit more sense. We want to get to a state where when we look at decisions that we make in the organization, even if there is disagreement, whether it's between two sets of groups in our organization or between the community or even legislatively, as we evaluate decisions that we make, how can we look at we are all working towards the same thing, which is what's best for kids. What's best for kids defined in Fargo Public Schools is by achieving these measures on these strategic plans. Now let's evaluate what we're both saying and the position that we're both presenting in terms of how easy or how much better is my position versus yours in hitting the same goal that we have. That conversation is far less weaponized when I already start from the baseline of we're trying to achieve the same measure, and now it's just a matter of evaluating it. That doesn't mean that if I don't get my way, I'm not going to feel unheard or unvalued, which might be the case, but the beauty of what we're doing and the structure that we're putting in place is that 6 months from now, if Bob and I disagree, but I know that we're both trying to achieve this measure of reducing recidivism, I can just look at the data and say, Bob told you I was right, like you didn't get there. And our built-in continuous improvement progress will be something that we can then say, okay, this strategy is working or it's not working, let's pivot. And it doesn't put us in a situation of questioning someone else's intent. So how does this shape out, right? Here's more words that we don't need, but essentially what I'm trying to say is that looking at trying to achieve an outcome, if the outcome is to improve in this area, I think our unified strategic and operational plan can be a strategy to be able to do that. And if the strategy is not effective, we'll know a year from now because we'll have this data again. And I'm not saying this is the sole strategy. I think there's a lot more that we have to do. But the reason I think that this could be a strategy is because it's going to provide unified vision and alignment. It's going to empower our staff through results monitoring to be able to make changes where they deem necessary, as knowing that we're all working towards the same piece. It's going to provide more clarity and transparency on how we build our budget and where our resources are allocated. It's going to help us with, as we go through strategic staffing, clearly communicate and provide role clarity of who's responsible for what and what their contribution is to both their individual goal, but the overall goal of the organization. But then also, as you saw in the staff survey, a big piece was professional development. And I think that we have to be able to create a structure where staff recognize what can we do so you are heard more on professional development. And I think we've already thought about other strategies that we're going to look in this area too, including like, do we need to do multiple staff surveys? Because someone's evaluation of professional development might be very different immediately after it's finished versus 6 months from now, when they've had a chance to fine tune that craft that they were developed in, that new strategy that we told them to use in their classroom, and they're reflecting on that practice. But the second piece where I think this is going to really help us is, as administrators, and myself included, maybe it'll also recognize that some of the pieces that we're pushing for PD are areas that we can give teachers some autonomy back, because if they're achieving the goals that they need to do, why force them for a change just because I went to a conference and saw this change or something else? Right now, there are mandated curricular PDs, there are mandated state PD. Some of those pieces we're never going to be able to change. And if that's where staff don't feel like their voice is heard, like we'll be able to better communicate that. These are district or state or federal mandates that you have to do. But I do think that we owe it to our staff to be able to provide a framework for them where we say, if you're reflective on a day-to-day basis of your own growth and we're working towards the same measure to be reflective on, then we can empower you to make that determination of what is working or what is not, and then move forward accordingly. So those are just some ways. But now I also want to be able to dive a little bit deeper into the transparency of the decision-making place and say how we as a district plan on using the strategic and operational plan to make decisions moving forward. So I really gave that 3 different circumstances earlier about sometimes we get in the situation where someone might be trying to, their position might be trying to defend or preserve a practice, and we might be trying to come from the perspective of getting to an outcome. Moving forward, our position as a district is going to be that decisions will be made achieving strategic plan measure outcomes over the consistency in a process or a practice. So what does this look like? An example I can give is, and all of these are hypothetical situations, and I just want to be very clear about that too. But if we have a direct measure of improving literacy rates across our schools, and this is, although it's hypothetical, it's very similar to like science of reading. If all of our staff know that the goal is we are all working to get all of our students improved in their essential learning outcome and proficient in English, then the push from the district on a new reading curriculum isn't this inherent battle between I want to keep the way I've always taught reading versus what I'm trying to do. The question becomes, is this new strategy better aligned to get to the goals that we want? And then we can evaluate that over time. So in our traditional approach, we might have been making decisions based on our historical spending patterns and then our generalized programs that we are trying to then uniformly apply across all schools, regardless of each school's unique needs and the specific challenges that they face in improving their literacy rate. Whereas when we start now saying, let's look at the outcome that we're trying to achieve and then which strategy is best to get there, we might make more data-driven analysis. We might allow for more tailored interventions, have more transparent decision-making because our why is very clear. And our why, if we're wrong about our why, it'll be very clear as we start progress monitoring that data over time. And it'll also allow us to monitor and adjust. And our district inadvertently did this and became exemplars for the state. And that is because the leadership of Ed Clapp several years ago said, looking at these measures of success, if you can buy into this is how we evaluate reading performance, our kids are not working with what we're doing. We've started this program, we're doing something differently. We were lucky in that moment that when that leadership from that school and those teachers had the conversations with Missy and I, we agreed on how we measured success. We were unison there and their data showed that that was working. And that is why we allowed Ed Clapp to do something a little bit different than the rest of our districts and how literacy instruction was provided. And then Ed Clapp became the pilot and the ignition to start the science of reading movement in North Dakota, which is now across all of our schools. And that is the beauty of being able to have a unison set of goals that we're all working towards and we're using to evaluate the work that we're doing. And then lastly, how it is outcome-driven thinking. But I think the next couple of examples is it's where it can get really tough for us. And not only am I going to provide how we're going to look at decisions making moving forward, but also an avenue for board members if they want to preserve another part. So, and I'll talk through that. So decisions will be based on achieving strategic plan measure outcomes over specific experiences. So let's say that our technology team determines that a lower level iPad is what is needed, hypothetical situation, to hit these measures that we have in our goal. We may have a group of stakeholders in our district that says, I will actually want a much higher level of iPad for all of our students, and that's what they deserve. They deserve the most newest version, even if it costs more. It's an experience that our students need to have. We as a district have to try to figure out what's the best fiduciary decisions that we can make for taxpayer dollars. How do we evaluate that decision? If our technology team decides that actually the measure of success that we're using for informational technology is this climate and culture survey where students feel that they have adequate use of technology to support their learning, and that can be accomplished with a lower level product, despite some of our stakeholders wanting more, we would prioritize the decision of our team that is most aligned to what we're trying to accomplish. Why do we need to spend more to hit that same measure if we're able to do it with the resources we have? That is something that I believe we owe our taxpayer dollars. And then we would develop our operational plan as a district. And then if that number ever started shifting, that's when we would decide to make a change because we wouldn't be getting there. It would also provide clear, transparent communication to our staff and others. The reason we're making this decision is because we aren't trying to achieve an outcome of this experience that you want everyone to have the highest end technology in their hands. The outcome that we're trying to achieve is hitting this measure on this survey, that what is adequately needed to support someone's learning. And there is a difference between adequacy and the highest cutting edge technology. But what does that mean if a board member then says, well, I actually want to prioritize that high-end technology, and that's important for me. If that ever happens, then our request would be, as we move forward, then you make that a measure in the following year's strategic and operational plan. And why would we ask board members to wait less than a year until we start that budgetary cycle the next time around? Is because when you then incorporate the technology and objective to the strategic plan, you allow us to systemically say, okay, now if this is a guaranteed experience that our board members want or the board wants for all students, then let's figure out the right way to do that as an organization. Then next year when we're building the strategic and operational plan, that would become a priority because that's now a measure that we're trying to meet around that high-end technology. We would then go through our natural process of strategic and operational plan approval where we do engage a variety of stakeholders. These are the measures working, so we'd get that community support too. And then we would also have a framework to then monitor, is this goal something that we truly appreciate of trying to get a high-end technology in everyone's hands, and what is the value of that as we go over time? So by methodically incorporating that in the following year's strategic and operational plan, we are able to make and use our investments in a thoughtful manner with a clear focus, and then also measure how they work over time. So just some specific examples from this past year, that's just been a learning piece for us. Parental leave and substitute earned leave were great things that came out of negotiations, but they felt a little bit rushed this year because to be able to support parental leave, at one point we had to consider, okay, what additional staff do we need to be able to make this happen? The substitute earned leave policy, still to this day, administration is trying to work with FEA, but there's a lot of nuances and pieces where it's probably not gonna be perfect for everyone wanted. Another example I can give you is AI. Like me as a superintendent, I think everyone that knows me personally knows that I love AI, I love the utilization of AI. But I've said this often, our system should be protected against any one person, even if it's a superintendent's passion interest, right? Just because I think I can use AI to benefit education if I was a teacher, that doesn't mean every teacher currently has to adopt AI and use ChatGPT because I've been doing it as an organization, because it's not tied to an outcome. So if that's something that I care about, then I would push and see if we can get buy-in to say, next year, every student should be having access to ChatGPT account, right? Or AI becomes a focus of one of our outcomes for our strategic plan. But just because that is something that I'm utilizing, that doesn't mean that if it's helped me with my job, it's going to help every teacher with their job. And I don't need to impose a new technique if our teachers are already getting a result to what they need to do. So now our team can actually take a look back and say, well, Rupak might be big on ChatGPT, but maybe it's Microsoft Copilot, maybe it's something else. Or maybe AI is not a strategic priority. And at this point, it's not. Like, it's something that's going to be part of our educational system. But right now, we're focusing on the outcomes that we want for our students. So at most, it's a strategic enhancement partner. Even looking at legislatively, right? We have, in this past couple of years, there has been a piece of legislation that obviously we decided to follow federal law over state law. And now we have a piece of legislation that is asking us that now there's some community concern about us following a piece of legislation subject to interpretation on that piece. But we're always going to be in this position of like, why would, and I have been asked this question in the past 2 weeks, why would the district take the position that you did when it came to the support of LGBTQ2I+, plus students, but then also not take the same position and just what the perception was defy state law when it came to this video that we're trying to watch? And like, my response to that is that it's not about my position in which pieces of legislation we as a district want to follow and not follow. It's about what is it that we're trying to achieve. And the reality of the situation is all of the student data on mental health really did show that if we continued some of those practices and not followed federal law, that would cause harm on a specific mental health measure that I'm evaluating as a district. Now, if I took a board position or an admin position on another piece of legislation not to follow, but it's not directly tied to one of our outcomes, then that's me imposing my own beliefs onto our system and what we're doing there as well. So those are just a couple of examples of like why working through a system of resource allocation and strategic planning on the front end would be really helpful. And I did want to just highlight something that came out of negotiations that I think has worked extremely well, which was our special education workload analysis tool. That was something that at negotiations was decided to be launched this upcoming school year. And because of that little bit of time, we are able to build in the findings of that workload analysis tool now when we are staffing and budgeting for the next school year. We were able to get multiple groups of staff involved in that conversation, evaluate multiple platforms, and be able to do it on the front end. So that becomes a baseline for a minimum expectation for our school district as we staff and budget our school moving forward, to the point where we are comfortable with one of our measures next year saying that 100% of our special ed staff will be within the recommended workload range by that research-based workload analysis tool. That would have been a really hard measure to achieve and even track if we had to try to implement that middle of the school year, because we would have been working with just the FTEs that were allocated and budgeted for the school year, trying to figure some pieces out and shift people around and pulling one person, because we just wouldn't have had the resources to be able to do that. So I think the same thing goes when it comes to preserving of your principles versus the outcomes, right? So again, when our district is making decisions, we are going to focus on achievement towards our strategic plan measures and those outcomes over specific principles. And this has been evident, like number one example is right now we don't have a principle on what, is there a notion of a salaried employee getting extra duty pay? And should that be, if so, what should qualify for that criteria? Because we have multiple people throughout the organization that have or will continue to request extra duty pay. But if we continue to say, like, we just don't believe that administratively, that's in our purview, because of here's how we are using to value or evaluate employee satisfaction, which is through those measures related to Strategic Initiative 5, Result 3, which are all our human capital measures, then we're going to always have this back and forth piece. And when we say no to a staff to say, hey, we don't think that a salaried employee in this situation gets extra duty pay, it's going to create that feeling of unheard or feeling unvalued or unheard, which is very different conversation than saying, actually, this is how we are determining what we're trying to do to show value to our employees. It's making sure that 80% of our positions in each of these employee groups are competitive compared to West Fargo and Moorhead, which is one of our measures. It's making sure that we are measuring employee satisfaction here. And this is why we don't believe in that piece, right? It gives us a guiding principle to get there. At negotiations, or even we may have a difference in a principle on when you have a raise, should that be differentiated for teachers based on their years of experience or not? Or should everyone first be given a minimum raise? If we just sit and have a 2-hour debate, we may just continue to get frustrated with one another if one person is making that decision based on the outcome they're trying to achieve towards another bigger goal that everyone's bought in, versus someone that just believes this principle needs to exist, regardless of what that outcome is. So that's why having a universal outcome first allows us a tool to then evaluate some of these pieces and say, hey, we're both trying to achieve making sure that all of our teachers are, 80% of our teachers are the highest paid teachers, whatever that measure says. I think it says in comparison to our neighboring districts, 80% of the positions categorized as teachers will be #1 ranked compared to our neighboring school districts. Does a differentiated pay for teachers get us there? Or does a same raise across every piece? Now we have a tool to evaluate both of those as strategies without questioning someone else and having to put someone in a position where they feel like they're defending their principle, whereas we are trying to get to an outcome. So that is how we want to use making some of those decisions. I think, unfortunately, 2 and 3 say the same thing. But even again, going to the long-range planning right now, we have community members that very much want to preserve the principle of a split school or their definition of a small school. But we as an organization are trying to achieve some of our key metrics around operational efficiency, around even cleaning. We are doing a square foot analysis by custodian to see what's the standard needed to keep all of our buildings clean, meet some of these facility metrics that we have. If some of those facility metrics lean themselves more towards a larger school or not having a split school, for example, from an efficiency standpoint, even from an admin staffing standpoint, that conversation we just had, then you'll always have this debate between me trying to preserve my principle, my value of keeping a small school, versus you trying to achieve this outcome. But if we've established on the front end, we're both trying to achieve this outcome, then it's a matter of saying, is this outcome better achieved by keeping a small school? Or is this outcome better achieved based on research on not keeping these schools split or a larger school? What is more efficient? What does the research show you? That conversation becomes a lot easier for us. Again, what happens in the situation where a board member might say, actually, that principle is more important to me than the progress that we would make, even no matter what the research says for that outcome, then I would say that the avenues that the board has, if they want to prioritize their principle, is any of these. You can update your executive limitation policies, and you would have to then convince the rest of your board to say, this principle becomes so important to me, even if it's at the cost of the measure that we're trying to achieve. Or you can update the FPS philosophies. When we started saying we will view discipline through the lens of restorative practices, that led to all of our practices shifting, and now we're going to track recidivism versus exclusionary discipline practices. I don't have to go and convince someone of changing maybe 15 years of the way they've conducted student discipline. I just say what we do in Fargo Public Schools, as established by the Board of Education that we work for, is we use a restorative mindset. So this is how we are going to work in that direction. Or you can update your board policies and your guiding principles. We have a class size, whether or not what the academic research says on class size, if that is an experience that our board values, then that is their guiding principle. So when we are having all of these conversations, whether it's about staffing today for next school year, developing long-range plan for future, looking at boundary implications whenever those conversations happen, we start with the class sizes that you have provided for us. That is the first starting point that Bob and Missy sit down with every principal at when they look at enrollment for next year, how many sections that they need. that can have a significant impact. So if a principle is more important to you than maybe what the research or the progress would say towards the outcome that we want to achieve, I think the board should utilize these options to then establish that principle, because then that will become the starting point from which we work versus this constant tiff that may happen between both wanting good things, but we're working towards an outcome that we feel that we're going to be held accountable to, and a board or community member wanting to work towards a principle. So I think those are where our structure works to be able to provide that avenue, so we can be more clear on our decision-making moving forward and say, this is why we're making the decisions that we are. So even if it's not, because I will never be able to, or central office staff will never be able to get in front of every teacher and get into every classroom, we have to create an avenue where we can say, if there's a gap in you being heard or lack of transparency in the decisions, it's not RUPOC being here saying that in your classroom is going to make you heard. It's you need to know, regardless of where RUPOC is, here's why the decision has been made, and this is the process that we're using. So that is the framework that we are trying to establish as an organization. So again, specific examples, the board had a very clear vision on what we do with storm makeup days. And people might have a disagreement on those philosophies, but that becomes a starting point for a calendar committee. This is what the board has told us in EL 14, and then that becomes a starting point. If someone disagrees, and this has happened, it can go back to the board for a visit, but that conversation was so much easier than what you would think for a calendar conversation, because that could be a very contentious conversation. I use class as an example, or even consistent feeder pattern. There might be a lot of research that says we might be able to achieve some of our goals and our measures in our school district faster or more effectively without having a consistent secondary feeder pattern. But because that is an experience that we have prioritized through board approved documents, it doesn't matter. Like, we don't need to have that debate, because that becomes a starting point of the conversations we're doing. And I already talked about recidivism earlier as well. So I think at the end of the day, if we are able to anchor all of our decisions into what works towards achieving the measures that the board has approved, and using that as a measure of success and the experiences that we want to provide our students in Fargo Public Schools, it's going to reduce the room to question the intent when there is a disagreement, because we're all trying to pursue those same common outcomes. But hopefully, we also won't have to focus on divisive tactics when we talk, because we know that at the end of the day, nothing is that personal. It's just a matter of which strategy is better to achieve this unified outcome that we want. And for the board members that were at NSBA and heard a lot about the Dignity Index and utilizing that piece for that communication, one of the pieces that you will see is that when conversation or conflict gets to a point of code orange, or when contempt arises, our path out is focus on facts, decisions, actions, and outcomes. But this doesn't work unless we're all tied to these same outcomes. And if we have a difference in which outcomes that we're working towards, we will never be able to get past this point, because we just are viewing a conversation and framing it in our mind differently. So hopefully, as we move forward, the board, administration, and all of our staff kind of buy into these goals, because that is how we view our charge as an organization. That is going to be the reason and the methodology in which we make the decisions that we do. But hopefully, even as board members, you recognize that there might be something that you didn't capture this year. Even though there was a month of review, there might be something that you're like, you know what, that measure's not the best measure that we want, or that measure is going to conflict with an inherent principle I have, or an experience that I want every child in Fargo Public Schools to have. And I think that's completely okay. And my response to that would be, then help get the rest of your board members there, and let's do it through the initial process when we're back here next November, December, January, when we're building this unified plan, because our entire system is complex, and it's complex because of the interdependencies of every element with one another, and that's why we need a unified vision to get there. But sometimes the overemphasis on one aspect or one element in our organization can create a ripple effect that may be known or may not be known, but for the person that's advocating for that change, it may not even matter if we haven't first decided that we're all working towards the same goal to get there, because then preserving that element that they want just does become their goal. So that is how we intend to use the Unified Strategic and Operational Plan. Hopefully that is going to provide more clarity to our staff and our board and our community moving forward on how we measure success and how we make decisions. But most importantly, hopefully it provides a universal standard for all of us from this table down to each individual teacher and support staff member within our organization on why we do what we do, even if we don't have the ability to communicate it or be as visible as we would like to be. So we will see how that plays out over the course of the next year. But we really do think, or I do believe that based on just the 5Y analysis and the research, that Unified and Strategic and Operational Plan can be one way that we can hopefully bridge that divide and what our staff is feeling. And I think that we owe it to them, and I owe it to them to respond to that data, and hopefully that does that. I know that I would not be able to single-handedly just say, like, district office will be more heard and more visible next year, because it is different between being visible and being heard. And we can create as many avenues that we want, but we have to be able to unpack really the layers behind our conversations and say, what is it that we're trying to accomplish first? And if we're not unified in that, then it's just going to be a much harder conversation. So thank you for the work that you did in approving that Unified Strategic and Operational Plan. That is how we intend to use it. I hope that you use it to challenge us, hold us accountable on what we're trying to accomplish, but also know that if we make decisions, I would like for you to utilize this plan and progress towards these measures to question myself, administration, or anyone else, because I think that's ultimately what our students deserve. So thank you for that, and I will stand for questions, and if not, that is the end of my very long admin presentation.
Yes, Robin?
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Oh, yes, Greg.
Since you advise us not to read every word on the PowerPoint, I'd like to eventually do that. How and where will that be made available?
I can send that out.
Okay.
I was gonna request the same thing, so if you want to send it to all of us, that'd be awesome.
Great. Anything else? Yeah, Nikki?
I just want to say thank you. I know it's been an enormous amount of work, but I respect the decision, the direction you're moving, and I'm behind it. I appreciate all that's gone into this with you and your cabinet. Thank you.
Yes, Yamal?
Well, I just want to say first and foremost, thank you for that incredible presentation to us. And I like the fact that, you put in the dignities that we just got from the NSBAs. It's really incredible. I like the fact that, you touch base on the communication piece, because I think that communication is the key to everything that you want to do in life, not only in school, but outside there. Now, if there is no communication among our teacher, our staff, and so forth, it can be definitely a challenge. And the fact that you acknowledge that, I really appreciate that. So sometimes it's best when you know that you have a weakness. I'm not saying you have a weakness there, but I'm just saying that when you acknowledge something and you saying that this is we need to work on this, that's the best way to move forward. And for me is that's what I'm about. If I made a mistakes, I will say I acknowledge it, and move forward and trying to find the best strategies to make sure that I can communicate with everybody. I might be quiet a little bit. I'm just observing how everybody's doing, but I'm observing still. But I just want to say thank you. It was really well put together.
Great. Any other comments or questions? Great, thank you. Okay, moving on to our consent agenda, I would look for a motion to approve it. Yes, Robin?
I move, approval of the consent agenda with the human capital actions.
Second.
Okay, thanks. Moved by Robin and seconded by Seth. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say yes.
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 Any opposed, same sign.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure that was for the first yes. So motion will carry, and we will move on to our first item for business under 7A, which comes to us through memo number 104, the ND PERS 457 plan establishment. And Dr. McKenna, would you like to introduce this for us, please?
Yes, Madam Superintendent, Dr. Gandhi, members of the board. Just a quick overview, effective January 1st, 2025, the current plan that we have through PERS is a defined benefit. And for any staff that we hire that day or after, they will not be eligible to participate in that benefit. So the establishment of 457 allows us, instead of a defined benefit, it allows us an opportunity for a new plan that is different because it's a plan with a defined contribution instead of a defined benefit that all of our employees after that time will have the opportunity to elect to enroll in. There's, as indicated in the information, there's a couple different options that those employees can take. There's still the district contribution that we pay currently for the plan that we're on. And this is really not just a direction in North Dakota. This is a direction that most school districts all across the United States are moving to, grandfathering in their current staff, and then moving towards a defined contribution plan. And so in conversations with Jackie, we feel like this is the best plan opportunity forward because we cannot do a defined contribution plan without having this plan approved.
Thank you, Robin.
This is not the first time this has been in front of us, so thank you, administration, for all your work in preparing this. We didn't really have a choice, so with that, to start the conversation, I will move that we adopt the ND PERS 457 Deferred Compensation Plan Resolution and authorize administration to complete the employer participation agreement effective May 1st, 2024.
Second.
Thank you. Moved by Robin and seconded by Jamal. Any discussion?
That's fine. Oh, anyway, Dr. McKinnon, thank you. This is really great, so I appreciate it for bringing it forward to us.
All right, if there are no questions or comments, oh, there is.
I can
Great,
add
yes.
that this did go through the planning committee as well. The planning committee did, we were unified in bringing this proposal to the board.
Yes, thank you so much for adding that. We saw this at our last meeting and had a discussion about it, and I think asked and answered a few questions. So thank you for mentioning that, Greg. All right, with that, Tara, would you please call the roll?
Clark,
Yes.
Day. Yes. Gullickson,
Yes.
Holden,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Newman,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
President Berkland.
Yes, motion carries. We will move on to our second item for business, the amendment to the purchase agreement for our district property through memo number 105. Tara, would you like to introduce this for us, please?
Yep, so what you have before you is memo number 105. On December 13th of 2023, we had entered into a purchase agreement for the sale of the old district office property. Subsequently, what we had done was we had amended that purchase agreement to extend closing for 60 days to ensure that the buyer had enough time to obtain financing. They have obtained the financing. However, while we were going through the process, we were ensuring that the title was clean so that we could transfer it without any subsequent issues. While going through that process, we did determine a defect that needed to be cleaned up. We are in the process of working through that. We have had all of the engineering completed and we are waiting to be placed on the city commission agenda. We anticipate that that will happen at some point in May, but we are not positive yet. So once that happens, we will have the approval from the city commission if it should pass, to vacate those current easements and then move forward with closing. So I am requesting at this point in time that the board extend the closing until June 30, on or before June 30, 2024. So that would give us a significant amount of time to close, and allow the city to do the appropriate vacation plat.
Thank you so much. Seth?
I move that the board authorize the execution of the Second Amendment to Purchase Agreement with the Rape and Abuse Crisis Center of Fargo Moorhead for the purchase of the real property located at 415 North 4th Street, Fargo, North Dakota.
Second.
Thank you. Moved by Seth and seconded by Robin. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, would you please call the roll for us again?
Day,
Yes.
Gullickson,
Yes.
Holden,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Newman,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Clark,
Yes.
President Berkland.
Yes, motion carries. Moving on to our board reports. Jim, could we start virtually with you if you have anything to report?
You sure can, and thank you. First of all, planning will be meeting next Tuesday at 7:30. You're all welcome to join us. The SCEC has a board meeting scheduled for tomorrow, and following the board meeting, the entire board will be interviewing the 3 finalists for the executive director job. One is John Porter, Jolene Garrity is the second, and Dr. Oster Holland, I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly, is the third. And probably the most important part of my report, although I'm not sure if Anne Marie has secured a date, but today going forward would be a great time to be asking local businesses for some kind of a door prize that we could give out at the picnic this year. And I'm hoping I might be invited back as kind of a guest barbecuer. But regardless of that, it's time to start getting those door prizes. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, and then Katie, could we move on to you?
Sure. On March 28th, I attended our negotiations committee meeting, and then along with some other of you here, early Friday morning, headed off to New Orleans for the National School Board Association Conference. Got back late last night, about midnight, I think, was when I got home. But it was very informative. I attended some sessions on running a district-wide student senate, changing the superintendent's evaluation to include more district growth planning in it, onboarding for new members, and we attended a very inspirational talk with Ruby Bridges.
Thank you so much. Greg?
Yep, pretty much the same as Katie. Had negotiations on the 28th of March. On the 2nd of April, though, I attended a CEA committee meeting in the afternoon, and then I was also at NSBA.
Thanks, Greg. Nikki?
March 28th, we had the negotiations committee meeting. April 2nd, CEA. That evening, there was a board candidate forum I attended for a short while. April 8th, yesterday, I had the honor of attending the FPS Town Hall. And tomorrow morning, we have a meeting regarding superintendent contract.
Thank you. Robin?
Thank you. Attended CEA, the board candidate orientation, and likewise also attended National School Boards Association. I did not have time to put together any recaps yet because I'm still reeling from our late flights, but I will do that at a future time.
Thank you so much. Seth?
Yeah, last month on the 28th, had a negotiations committee meeting. And then on the 2nd, I also partook in the board info session. And let's see, I did not go to New Orleans for the NSBA, but I do hope that everyone's travel home was much better than it was last year. Thank you.
It was. Right. Thanks, Nimal.
Thank you. On April 2nd, I attended the CEA and the board candidate forums. And then also too, I was invited by Parent Guy, your child anxieties and mental health series that I attended as a panel, but we didn't do much in there. We just kind of listened and everything that they said about mental health series and how useful it would be for the parent to be able to use that guy. GAC committee was canceled April 4th. I went to Lincoln's as normal on Thursday and Tuesdays. Well, Thursday last week, I attended the student lunch buddy that I always do at Lincoln's. I have my two amazing kids there, students. They're not my kids, but but they like my kids. They just so amazing. Whenever they see me, they run to me, and we just go to our room, and they get to eat their foods, and we get to play game. And then after that, I bring them back to the class. And then on Fridays, of course, just like every rest of us here, I attended NSBA at New Orleans. It was very interesting, very fun. It's always refreshing to see new ideas and meet new peoples, and you really get to see what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. And I thought I'm always excited about that piece because I come back with I'm very enthusiastic and see what I can do to help our districts. And then again, like today, I went again to my students' lunch buddy again, and it's always fun to just hear them because I'm like, we miss you. Where have you been? So, but it's always something that I love to do. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy.
Yeah, thank you. CEA has met, as said, and I attended the board info session.
Great, thanks very much. So I also attended negotiations on March 28th, as several of you have mentioned, and then attended the candidate forum on April 2nd, and then was in New Orleans from Friday through, well, technically today, because we got home around midnight. And I just wanted to briefly talk about, I've had a really great experience at both of the national conferences I've gone to, but this one in particular, I really, really enjoyed, and I feel like I got a lot of value out of it. I attended a history of disability rights session, and what struck me the most is that of all of our civil rights legislation, this is the latest. So we didn't have any federal civil rights laws until 1973, and so what kind of got me thinking is just the buildings that we have and thinking about our long-range facility planning. They were not even built with having integrated classrooms in mind. So it's just always, really neat to hear kind of the history of our country and how some things, even if they're fantastic ideas, come on to us so late. And as a few of you have mentioned, we had the exceptional experience of listening to Ruby Bridges, who was one of the students that was integrated after the Brown versus Board of Education discussion. And I loved how, even though she was 6 years old when it happened, she took that experience and let it inform her entire life and work and passion and commitment to her community. And it was an honor to hear her talk. I also loved the second key, plenary speaker. We had Dr. Timothy Shriver, who looks very much like a Kennedy. And he was fantastic, though, and I'm thrilled that Dr. Gandhi is now already incorporating the dignity index that he talked about into our strategic planning. I hope that this dignity, and I just like to think of it as the opposite of contempt or disregard or disgust. I just hope that can kind of infect everything that I do as a board member now, and I just absolutely loved it. A few of the other things I went to were a policy governance course, and I have to say I'm really proud of our board, and obviously this work was done long before my time, but we have, I think, an outstanding policy governance model, especially when I talk to other districts and how they've implemented it. So that was really refreshing to hear. And then my final session that I went to that I want to mention is a discussion about how board policies can help your recruitment and retention of teachers. And I'm happy to share any of the program information that I got, because I thought that was also really useful and interesting. And then finally, I just wanted to make sure I shared this special invite from the students at Claire Barton. They have their art show next Tuesday, or in Tuesday the 23rd, so 2 weeks from now. It is a board night, a board meeting night, but it goes until 8 p.m. So if we end early, perhaps we can head to the art show. So as I mentioned, our next regular meeting is April 23rd. It is 7:15, and we are officially adjourned.